Today we're going to be doing some chronograph testing with the Fiocchi Performance line of 22 long rifle ammunition. What's up, crew? Welcome back to the channel. Now I want to throw a question out there to you right off the bat today, and that is, when it comes to 22 long rifle ammunition, what is your favorite velocity? Is it subsonic, standard velocity, high velocity, or hypersonic velocity? Let me know in the comments below. Now, as always, out on the range, we have a few caveats. Number one is my microphone does not always pick up the muzzle report. And number two, we have certain drawbacks, even though it's a beautiful day, that we have to deal with, like bugs and birds and loud neighbors and traffic. You get the picture. We will tough through it though and get this done. So today we're going to be taking a look again at the performance line of 22 long rifle ammunition from Fiocchi. And with the practical, let's say, accuracy testing that I've done already on this, it does pretty well. It holds pretty good groups. It falls in between that sweet spot right there between some of your bulk ammunition and some of your match ammunition. Today I do want to, however, check out some velocity information, and that's why we've got the Smith & Wesson 422 here with a 6-inch barrel, and we've got my Tactical Innovations Elite 22 with a 16-inch barrel. That way we can test each one of these ammunitions and get an idea of the average velocity as well as the deviation on the velocity across those particular strings. So with all that out of the way, let's get things set up. Let's get the chronograph turned on and let's get started. I'm going to start off the testing with the Smith & Wesson 422 field model with a 6-inch barrel. Going to run some subsonic first, move to standard, and then finish up with high velocity. As always, boys and girls, safety first, so don't forget the eye and ear protection. $9.72. $9.68. $9.54. $9.61. And $9.65. Now, if you're not able to keep up with the data as I'm throwing it out there to you, no worries. Here, more towards the end of this video, I will throw a chart or a graph up on the screen with the data that we collected during this testing. So with the Fiocchi Subsonic and the Smith & Wesson 422, we got an average velocity of 964 feet a second. The deviation across those 5 rounds tested was only 18 feet per second, and that's not too terribly bad. Now let's move on and get some data using 5 rounds of the standard velocity. 953. 958. 957. 926. And that last shot was 979. So some interesting data on the standard velocity ammunition here. I had to go back and look to make sure that I didn't switch my subsonic with my standard. It turns out I did not. And we're pulling an average velocity in that standard ammunition of 954 feet a second. 10 feet a second slower than the subsonic ammunition. So that's a little bit strange. Not altogether though. You got to remember that the advertised velocity is never going to be the velocity that you're going to get most likely, because there's so many variables that come into play, whether it's barrel length, altitude, barometric pressure, temperature, and a lot of other different things. Now, while the average velocity was lower on the standard velocity ammunition, the deviation, which is to me one of the most important things, was far greater at 53 feet per second. Now let's move on. Let's run some of the high velocity through here. And yeah, then we'll be able to compare all three. 1142. 1140. 1138. 1136. 1131. Our average velocity out of that was 1,137 feet a second. And here's the kicker. The deviation was only 11 feet a second. So the high velocity, super consistent, and that's a good thing. But the fact that it's more consistent than the standard velocity, to me, makes little sense. Now let's test 5 rounds of the subsonic ammo through my Tactical Innovations Elite 22. $10.91. $10.57. $10.66. $10.75. And $10.49. Now with the 16-inch barrel as opposed to the 6-inch barrel that we shot previously, we got a average velocity in the subsonic ammunition of 1,066 feet a second, about 100 feet a second more. And like I said, that lines up more barrel length, typically faster velocities. What's interesting is, as I kind of called it a few seconds ago, we've got a deviation of 42 feet a second. So while velocity increased, deviation seemed to have increased as well, considering that with that 6-inch barrel, we was only at 18 feet per second deviation. So consider we got some really weird results with the standard ammunition in that pistol. I'm anxious to get these shots through this rifle and compare the data. $10.77. $10.46. $10.51. $10.63. And $10.47. Okay, so this data is going to completely blow your mind. Once again, our average velocity on the standard velocity ammunition, and no, I promise I do not have the boxes switched here, was 1,056 feet a second. Once again, 10 feet a second slower than the subsonic ammunition. Now the deviation was a little high at 31 feet a second, but not quite as high as it was through the pistol. But it's really weird that the standard velocity is slower in both the pistol and the rifle than the subsonic ammunition. I just don't get it. Now that you're as confused as I am about that situation, let's move on and finish up by running some high velocity ammunition through the rifle. 1269. 1289. 1245. 1254. And 1269. So with the high velocity ammunition through the rifle there, we got an average velocity of 1,223 feet per second, which once again, in comparison to the high velocity in the pistol, it's about 100 feet a second more. So we're pretty consistent as far as the barrel length and the increase in velocity. So that's good. The deviation, however, with the high velocity ammunition, a little bit higher than I would like to see personally at 44 feet per second. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to get this data and I'm going to put it into a chart, a graph, something that I can put on screen, and we'll talk about the results a little more. So while I'm getting that chart full of data ready for you guys, just a reminder to thumbs up the video if you like it, or heck, thumbs down if you don't. Really doesn't matter as long as you're engaging with the channel. All right, here we are back on the rage. I've got the data compiled. I have my cheat sheet, and I will throw your cheat sheet up on the screen. Remember, if at any time you need to look at this cheat sheet longer, by all means, just pause the video and yeah, do your thing. So I want to talk about several patterns or anomalies or oddball things that I see with these numbers. First of all, I want to mention before we get into these numbers that I know that I did not mention anywhere in this video the advertised or the marked velocity of each of these variants of ammunition from Fiocchi, and there's a reason for that. The reason is that's not listed on the box. Now when I compiled the data into this list, that made it easier for you to look at. I did a little bit of homework and I plugged those in. So something that I find interesting here, I mean, you should know, everybody should know, that velocities are going to vary. Like we talked about earlier, depending on barrel length, depending on temperature, barometric pressure, altitude, and several other factors, it's going to vary. But by looking at what Fiocchi claims the velocities are on this ammunition, and then looking at the average velocities of this ammunition through the rifle, it's fairly close. We've got 1,030 feet a second on the subsonic with 1,066 average. That's fairly close. We've got 1,070 feet a second with 1,056 on the standard. Again, pretty close to the advertised velocity. And then on the high velocity, we've got 1,260. And then the average on the rifle was 1,223, which again is fairly close. Now the next two things that stand out to me have to do with deviation. And I'm looking at the subsonic ammunition in the Smith & Wesson 422, and I'm looking at also the high velocity ammunition in that same pistol. Those are our lowest two deviations, the most consistent velocities out of the barrel. And so I think if you are running a firearm with a 6-inch barrel and you're looking for a pretty consistent ammunition, then either one of these two options could be the ammunition for that firearm. That said, we got to talk about the elephant in the room and the weirdness here. And if we look at the average velocities of the subsonic and we look at the average velocities of the standard velocity, we'll notice that both rifle and pistol, the standard velocity, even though Fiocchi says that it should be higher at 1,070 feet a second versus 1,030 feet a second, the standard velocity anyway is somewhere around 10 feet a second less than a subsonic velocity. I don't know why that is, and just to double check everything, I didn't do this on camera, but just to double check everything, I went back a couple of different times after initially filming the shots through the chronograph, and fired some more groups just to see. Now, to be fair, when we're talking about 1,030 feet a second advertised velocity on the subsonic versus 1,070 feet a second advertised velocity on the standard velocity, that is not a huge difference, and maybe we're dealing with some type of outside variable causing those to actually flip under the reality of testing that ammunition through the chronograph. Now, the final thing that I want to talk about here again is how the difference in the barrels create a difference in velocity, and not just that it creates a difference in velocity. I think, again, that's something that is fairly common sense. Most people are going to know. But if we look at these numbers, it's really interesting how we're almost spot on difference between a 6-inch barrel and a 16-inch barrel, a difference of 10 inches, right? We're right there on that 100 feet a second difference between those two barrel lengths on each different type of ammunition tested, the subsonic, the standard, and the high velocity. So there's a look at the stats on paper. I hope that this helps some of you out there that are a little bit more nerdy with the numbers. If you just want a rough live fire accuracy test, I've also got that video up. I think I threw it up just a few days or maybe a week ago, something like that. Jump over on the channel and just check that one out. If you have anything to add, looking through this chart that we just talked about, that you find odd or weird, or if you see some pattern that we didn't mention, then please, by all means, hit us up in the comments below and let's talk about it. Once again, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for watching. Till next time, don't forget to chain fire freedom.